The case ended with a guilty plea and a life sentence. Yet it remains troubling because it exposed how violence can emerge without warning, carried out by someone no one had ever feared, in a place where familiarity was mistaken for safety. A young woman left her home for a routine run and never returned, and the person responsible blended so completely into the background of daily life that suspicion arrived only after the damage was irreversible. Sydney Sutherland was 25 years old, a registered nurse, and the youngest child in a close-knit family from Grubbs, Arkansas. She was known for her steadiness and her sense of responsibility, traits shaped early by a strong bond with her mother Maggie, and reinforced by a household where communication and routine mattered. Sydney spoke with her mother every day, often multiple times, and shared even small details of her plans. That closeness was not controlling or anxious, but mutual and warm, rooted in trust. From an early age, Sydney showed a natural inclination toward caring for others. She did well in school, avoided conflict, and carried herself with a quiet confidence that made people comfortable around her. Nursing was a natural extension of who she already was. At Harris Medical Center, where she worked after completing her training, colleagues described her as dependable and attentive, someone who brought calm into stressful situations. Patients remembered her not just for clinical care, but for presence and reassurance. Outside of work, Sydney's life was full. She lived with her partner Alex, shared her home with dogs she adored, and spent time with nieces and nephews whenever she could. She valued structure and balance, and physical activity was part of that balance. Running was not a performance or a challenge for her, but a way to clear her head and maintain routine. She often ran the same rural roads near her home, places she knew well and considered safe. In August 2020, Sydney and her family took a vacation to Florida. It was unremarkable in the best sense, filled with walks, swimming, photographs, and ordinary moments that only later took on weight. When she returned home, she resumed her routine immediately, refreshed and focused with no indication that anything was wrong or changing. Quake Llewellyn lived only a few miles away. He came from a farming family that had been part of the same county for generations, owning and working large stretches of land. The Llewellyns were widely respected, known for consistency and hard work, and had even received a local Farm Family of the Year recognition several years earlier. Quake grew up working with machinery and livestock, learning the rhythms of farm life and the geography of the land in detail. By all outward measures, his life appeared unremarkable. He had no criminal record, no history of complaints, and no reputation for aggression. He was quiet and socially withdrawn, but not disruptive. Neighbors described him as reserved and solitary, someone who kept to himself and avoided attention. In a small community, that kind of personality did not stand out as threatening. It was simply accepted. On the surface, Sydney and Quake existed in separate worlds. She worked in healthcare, surrounded by people and responsibility. He worked mostly alone, among fields and equipment. Their lives overlapped only by location, by shared roads, and the assumption that those roads were safe. On August 19, 2020, Sydney's day began normally. She drove to Jonesboro for a scheduled session with her personal trainer, completed the workout, and returned home. Security cameras later confirmed her movements as she arrived, gathered her belongings, and left again wearing running clothes. She stopped briefly at her mother's house to drop off mail that had accumulated during the family's vacation. The visit was short and ordinary. They talked about baking, about plans for the rest of the day, and about Sydney's intention to go for a run. Maggie suggested she rest, noting the heat, but Sydney brushed it off gently, describing the run as a break rather than exertion. They parted as they always did, with expressions of affection and the expectation of speaking again soon. Shortly after 2:30 p.m., Sydney left her home and began running along Highway 18, a familiar rural route between Newport and Grubbs. It was a road she had used many times before, lightly traveled and bordered by farmland. Around the same time, Quake Llewellyn was driving his pickup truck along that same stretch. He noticed a woman running along the roadside. There was nothing unusual about her behavior, and nothing to indicate distress. He passed her, then turned his vehicle around and returned to the area. At some point, he slowed and began watching her. What followed was not an accident of circumstance, but a deliberate act. He steered his truck towards Sydney and struck her, later acknowledging that he used the vehicle intentionally. The impact left her severely injured and unable to escape. Instead of calling for help, he loaded her into the bed of his truck and drove away from the highway onto a dirt road leading to land owned by his family. In a secluded area, out of view, he committed further acts of violence. Sydney was left without assistance and without the possibility of rescue. Afterward, he decided to kill her. The medical examiner later determined that her death was not immediate. She suffered multiple injuries over a period of time, beginning with the collision and ending with fatal trauma inflicted by force. After she died, Llewellyn buried her in a shallow grave on the same land his family had worked for years. He covered the site and left. He returned home, showered, changed clothes, and placed what he had been wearing into a laundry hamper at his mother's house. He ate dinner with his family and went on with his evening. No one around him noticed anything unusual. He did not flee, seek help, or confide in anyone. The concealment was quiet and methodical. When Sydney did not return home that evening, Alex initially waited, assuming a delay. As time passed and messages went unanswered, concern grew into alarm. Sydney was known for staying in contact even during workouts. When calls went straight to voicemail, Alex contacted Maggie, who confirmed she had seen her daughter earlier that day. Together they realized something was wrong. That night, Alex reported Sydney missing. Law enforcement took the report seriously from the start. The next morning, a large-scale search was underway, involving local officers, state investigators, federal agents, and hundreds of volunteers. The community mobilized quickly, combing roadsides, fields, and tree lines along Sydney's usual running route. Investigators also turned to digital evidence. Sydney had been carrying her phone and wearing an Apple Watch, which provided location data. The information narrowed the search to a specific stretch of Highway 18. A delivery driver confirmed seeing her running alone along the road at the expected time, reinforcing the timeline. On August 20th, searchers found Sydney's phone lying in the grass near the roadway. It was intact and appeared to have been placed there rather than dropped. Forensic analysis later confirmed it had been moved. At that point, investigators began treating the case as a likely crime. Anyone known to have been in the area was questioned, including Quake Llewellyn. He came forward voluntarily, stating that he had seen Sydney running and wanted to help. He allowed investigators to examine his truck. During that examination, blood was found in the truck bed, directly contradicting his account. Further analysis of his phone showed that his movements closely matched Sydney's route and timing. Surveillance footage from the Llewellyn family farm showed his truck leaving and later returning with a tarp covering the bed, concealing a large shape that had not been there before. Confronted with this evidence, Llewellyn's story changed. He admitted to hitting Sydney, initially framing it as an accident, then acknowledged taking her body, assaulting her, and burying her. searches of his mother's home uncovered clothing with Sydney's hair and DNA. On August 21st, investigators were led to the burial site. Sydney's body was recovered from the shallow grave. The forensic findings confirmed a sequence of escalating violence rather than a single impulsive act. Llewellyn was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and related offenses. The case moved quickly through the legal system. A psychiatric evaluation found him competent to stand trial, with no severe mental illness that would explain his actions. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the possibility of the death penalty, he accepted a plea agreement. In October 2021, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Sydney's family, the sentence brought accountability but not relief. Their loss was permanent, and the knowledge that the crime had been carried out by someone so unremarkable in appearance added a lasting unease. The case left behind questions about how violence can remain hidden until the moment it surfaces, and how communities can mistake familiarity for safety. Sydney Sutherland is remembered not for how she died, but for how she lived, as a daughter, a partner, a nurse, and a presence that brought steadiness to others. The quiet end of the case does not erase its impact, but it underscores a reality that remains difficult to accept, that danger does not always announce itself, and justice, even when achieved, cannot restore what was taken.